Hi guys, Olive here today to bring you the next installment in my ongoing series of videos all about the 90s PBS Kids TV show, Wishbone. In case you've never seen Wishbone before, then I'll tell you that it was a half-hour television show for kids, and each episode featured two interconnected storylines. The first storyline was always an adaptation of a work within the literary canon. So that was most frequently a book, but it could also be a short story, a play, a myth, a legend, a folktale, even an epic poem. This show was extremely ambitious. And then in the other storyline, we followed a 1990s era family living in Texas with their pet Jack Russell Terrier Wishbone, and whatever was going on with them in their storyline always tied back to the themes found within the literary adaptation. In this series of videos I do here on my channel, I look at one episode of Wishbone per video and I compare that episode to the literary work that they took on within it. How are they similar? How are they different? Are they similar enough to give the viewer of the episode a real sense of what that literary work is all about? Did the writers of the episode pull out any kind of moral message from the source material to communicate to the young audience at home? And finally, was it an entertaining episode to watch? In today's video, we will be looking at a mid-season 1 episode of Wishbone that adapts the Edgar Allan Poe short detective story, The Purloined Letter. That episode is titled The Purloined Paper. Let's take a look. What's the story, Wishbone?
What's the story, Wishbone? What's this you're dreaming of?
At the start of this episode, Joe and Ellen are getting ready to leave the house to start their days when Ellen notices that Joe decided to change his shirt after breakfast. He's wearing a nicer one now. Joe dismisses it, and after they rush out the door, Wishbone is searching in vain for his newspaper chew toy, which is right under his nose. But that lost object reminds him of an Edgar Allan Poe short story, The Purloined Letter. In the adaptation of that story, a detective named Dupin is visited by the Paris chief of police, who needs his help with a very important case he's investigating. A letter that the queen wished to conceal from the king was taken from her, right in front of her, no less, by a chancellor who recognized the handwriting and the seal on the envelope. She didn't draw attention to it because the king would have discovered her secret. And because it is a secret, that chancellor has been blackmailing the queen with the letter. And even though everyone knows that he has the letter, no one has been able to find it in the chancellor's quarters, not even after an extremely thorough search. Back in Texas, we get a hint about a different mystery, the mystery of why Joe was trying so hard to look good for school. He's got a little crush on a teacher who he spends time admiring as she's helping him out, drawing him a sketch of the Battle of Waterloo, which the class is clearly learning about. Joe notices that on the back of the paper that she's using, there's an old list of supplies. The teacher dismisses that list as old. She doesn't want to waste paper, so she always uses both sides of a sheet. When Joe gets back to his desk, another student named Curtis notices his crush, and when Joe starts doodling sweet nothings on a spare piece of paper during the lesson, Curtis tries to take it. Joe quickly folds it up and tries to get it away from him, but the teacher, mid-lesson, intervenes by taking the paper away from both of them. Joe is horrified that the teacher is going to see what he was writing about her, and Curtis vows to get that paper and show it to everyone. Later, we hear that Curtis was given detention for snooping around the teacher's desk, probably looking for that paper. It's unclear if he found it, but Joe is desperate to find it first, so the teacher doesn't see it and Curtis can't use it against him. He searches the classroom, he even searches the trash, and he starts to suspect that Curtis has it because it's nowhere to be found. There's better news back in the book adaptation. Dupin found the letter and he claims his reward. He explains how he did it. He deduced that a clever, creative man like the Chancellor wouldn't have hid the letter in a secret place, which was the strategy behind the in-depth police search. Instead, the Chancellor would hide it out in the open, right under everyone's noses. So, when Dupin visited the Chancellor under the pretenses of a social call, he noticed an off-looking letter A beaten up, ripped one in an otherwise pristine letter holder. Turns out that was the letter being searched for. So Dupin returned another day after having hired someone to create a distraction in the street. As the Chancellor looked down upon the ruckus, Dupin swapped the letter for another one he created to look just like it, and only later did the Chancellor realize he'd been duped. There's a happy ending in Texas, too. While Wishbone creates a distraction, Joe is able to return to school to continue his search for that piece of paper. He looks everywhere, and he's about ready to give up when he notices a small detail about the extra credit sheet hanging on the wall. There's a crease in it. Then Joe remembers how his teacher said she always uses both sides of the paper, and when he flips over that extra credit sheet, there is his embarrassing love note. Joe removes it and rewrites the extra credit to put in its place. Joe explains this all to Curtis, who is beyond peeved that he didn't get to the paper first, but actually neither of them got to it before the teacher, who says hi to Joe on her way out the door and takes that time to correct Joe's spelling in the love note, horrifying him that she saw it before repurposing the paper. So let's talk about this episode, starting with the fact that I actually found it kind of confusing, at least at first. I actually had to rewatch this episode. I've never had to do that throughout this series, but I had to watch it a second time because the first time I was convinced that Joe was putting his little love note on the sketch of the Battle of Waterloo that the teacher had given him, but that would mess up all the details of the following mystery, and that's why I ended up really confused. You wouldn't think that a kid's show could tie my brain into a knot. I'm normally pretty quick on the uptake, so I'm tempted to think that they just weren't clear enough about that detail, but it could have also been a me problem. In terms of fidelity to the source material, though, they did keep it pretty close, which I appreciate. The only discernible difference that I picked up on between the two of them is the fact that in the story, the man responsible for purloining the letter is referred to as a minister, versus in this episode, they call him a chancellor. And I'm assuming they swapped out those two very similar words in the political sense to avoid any mix-up with the minister of the religious kind. And there are a lot of details to process in both of these storylines. There are two different mysteries going on. So I think the choice to uncomplicate things where they could was a good one. In Wishbone episodes where they're adapting a mystery story, a moral message normally falls by the wayside because they're much more interested in establishing a mood and atmosphere within the episode than trying to teach a lesson. But actually, this one did have a little bit of a moral message, and that's sometimes when you're looking for something, it is right under your nose. If I had been in the writer's room with them, I probably would have included a secondary lesson, which they do sometimes. They have a secondary moral message. I would have wanted a message something along the lines of, don't put something in writing that you're not comfortable with other people seeing. And if we're going to set this episode in the modern day, I would also extend that to include things put on the internet. So this episode was faithful to the story, and it actually did have a minor moral message, which is more than what I was expecting from it. But there was just something about it that I didn't love. There's this whole subplot of the school janitor chasing Wishbone down as Joe is busy looking for the school paper. And in my summary of this episode, I boiled that down to just Wishbone creating a distraction because that's really all that is. And yet in the episode, we see this scruffy guy chasing Wishbone down for what felt like a lot of the episode. And really, it just seemed like filler. I've often said throughout this series that the writers of Wishbone do best when the source material they're working with is on the shorter side and they're just able to communicate more within the source material. But I think I might actually be eating my words here. I'm wondering if the Edgar Allan Poe short story didn't give them enough to work with, and that's why we had to watch Wishbone getting chased around a school for so much of this episode. But then on the other hand, when they were giving us all the details of both of those mysteries, and there were a lot of details, things did feel very rushed to the point where, like I said, I actually got some of the details mixed up. I had to watch it a second time to understand what I just saw. So I think I'm actually concluding that this episode just had pacing issues. So while I definitely won't be calling this episode a new personal favorite, I don't think it's the best episode of Wishbone they ever made, I would call it decent. I love that they adapted an Edgar Allan Poe short story, and I am sure that kids watching loved the inclusion of another mystery beyond the 2 Sherlock Holmes-inspired episodes. But those were my thoughts on this episode of Wishbone. If you have any of your own, I would love to hear what those are down in the comment section below. And if you would like to see more of these What's the Story Wishbone videos that I do, I have created a playlist that houses all the ones I've done up to this point, will contain all the ones I do in the future. It has been a long-term personal goal of mine to cover every single episode of Wishbone, and I have almost done that at this point. I do not have much left to go with this project. So if you have a favorite episode, if there's one in particular that you're looking for, there's a very good chance I have talked about it, and if I haven't, I will hear very shortly. Or if you just want to go back to the beginning of this project and binge through all of them, go on a little nostalgic roller coaster ride, I will link that playlist for you in the description box below and up in the cards. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.